Hello, this is Dr. Tamara Lewis. In today's legal writing tips, I want to focus on making the link. The topic will be about one challenge in legal writing, and it's known as the broken link. And we'll talk about the fix and how to link concepts together. So what exactly is a broken link? A broken link is when you discuss a standard of the law or a case without actually making a relevant link to the case or to your own scenario. This happens often in legal writing when students are so eager to show their knowledge of the holding and the facts of a case, but they forget to make that logical link to what their own scenario is about. It's like having a legal argument without context. I call it a broken link because without making the link between the two, it just seems very descriptive rather than analytical. So the fact of the matter is that the problem is about description rather than analysis. When we write in legal writing, we do want to engage in some type of analysis. In this example, which I'm going to work on in the next few minutes in the slides, we have a case where students were supposed to discuss the United States Code and its definition of cruel and degrading treatment, and they were supposed to put it in the context of cruel and degrading treatment of detainees who were immigrants in the United States of America. As students began to respond, they noticed that there is a case that talked about the Eighth Amendment and there was the U.S. Code, which gave a definition. But often what they didn't notice is, in fact, the U.S. Code relies on the interpretation of the amendments for its own definition. So a good piece of writing regarding this would tell the code and what it said and how it defined cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and then go to a case that interpreted one of those amendments to the Constitution in order to give content to that term, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Just explaining one case and explaining the code is not going to be enough. It's, in fact, a broken link. So to fix this problem of broken links, it's easy to think of things as interpretations of something, of a standard. And if you think about it as an interpretation, then you'll have to make the link between the two. In this case, we have a code, a statute, the U.S. Code, and it is actually given its meat, its content by case law, because you have to look to cases that have in fact interpreted those three amendments. So finding a case that gives us more specific information is useful if we can make the link. But there are other ways to link. For example, we may get information from a scholarly article or from a treaty body's general comments. In any of these cases, it's important to make the links between the more general statute provisions and the specifics of the case law, the scholarly article, or the general comment. So what happens when we try to make that link? And again, for simplicity, I've taken out the footnotes here, and I've also taken out the actual references to the code. So if we start with the code rather than with the case, we can make a much clearer link. Here I've said that there's a paragraph in the code that defines the phrase cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment as acts prohibited by the 5th, 8th, and 14th Amendment. And then I've moved to the case to say that the Supreme Court was considering Eighth Amendment content in the Estelle case, and that the court considered that deliberate indifference by prison personnel to a prisoner's serious injury is cruel and unusual punishment, and it violates the Eighth Amendment. So I make the link here in this last sentence by saying any indifference by prison personnel to serious illness or injury violates the Eighth Amendment and constitutes cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment under the U.S. Code section. But interpretation is not the only way to link. You can also link by making a comparison or a contrast between the legal standard and your scenario. Now, the legal standard in many cases is often just case law. So some sort of a decision that's come from a court, or it could be a decision from a treaty body, but it's a standard, and then you have to compare that standard to your own scenario. You can also contrast that standard with your scenario, and therefore you can distinguish it from your scenario. So the first way, as I mentioned, is to emphasize the similarities. So here I start with that same paragraph that we just enhanced with our deliberate link between the two. And now I want to, in this second paragraph, explain the similarities between the Estelle case and my own case. So my case is dealing with detained immigrants, and I want to make a comparison with how the court has discussed Mr. Gamble, who is actually a detained prisoner, not necessarily an immigrant. So here I start by saying that Estelle and Gamble talks about detained individuals being entitled to medical treatment. Then I give a specific fact from the case. While in prison, Mr. Gamble had the right to receive treatment for his injuries. I now make the link to my own facts by saying the same must also be true for detained immigrants because, similar to prisoners, they are not free to leave the detention center to get medical care. Making that link and comparing the prisoner to the detained immigrant is very important. Then I make a conclusion by saying, accordingly, when the U.S. border authorities do not seek proper medical care for detained migrants, their actions violate both the Eighth Amendment and the U.S. Code. And I can say that because I've said up above that indifference by prison personnel to serious illness also violates the Eighth Amendment and the U.S. Code. However, it would also be possible to take this very same case and not look at the similarities, but instead to distinguish it because its holding is actually not favorable to our situation. And I can distinguish it just as the same way that I made the similarity simply by looking at the facts. And the facts that are not the same as mine are the basis for me distinguishing this case. So here I mentioned that the Estelle case didn't find that Mr. Gamble's treatment actually violated the Eighth Amendment because he had actually received medical attention on several occasions. So in this case, the court had said that the officials were not deliberately indifferent to his injuries. However, in my case, I need to actually argue that not allowing detainees to have medical care is deliberate indifference. So I say border agents who routinely deny medical treatment to detained immigrants, however, do manifest deliberate indifference to the detainees' medical needs. Therefore, in accordance with the court's rationale, their actions violate the Eighth Amendment and the U.S. Code. So When you look at what I've done here, I've come to the same conclusion that I came to when I made the similarities, but here in distinguishing, I can still arrive at the same conclusion. To review, you avoid having broken links in your legal argumentation by using case law, scholarly articles, or general comments to interpret the provisions of your standard. Or you can highlight similarities between your case and the decisions made in case law. Finally, you have an option to distinguish unfavorable cases from your own case by showing the differences between them. Here's a quick tip for teaching how to build these links. Help your students visualize where their link is missing. And you can do that by just putting in an icon like this, a broken link, into their paper to show them that they need to link up these two ideas. With this visual thing in mind, students can go back into their writing and edit their text.